Hi, in this video I'm going to teach you how to score well for Googliness if you're planning to interview with Google. And this type of advice goes beyond just the standard Googling for commonly asked interview questions, which they recommend as interview prep. And also, if you look on their interview prep page, there is no keywords such as behavioral interviewing, but if you look a bit closer into the details, you'll find out they do recommend you prep questions on the lines of tell me about the time when, or how would you deal with certain situations, right? Which means that behavioral interviews are an integral part, and I would say an essential part of Google's interviews, and hopefully to your success in passing them, okay? The most commonly asked interview question in Google interviews would be, tell me about yourself. Okay, so this is the most commonly asked question in job interviews with pretty much any company nowadays. So it should go without saying that you must have something in mind here, something prepared if you want. Okay, now if I'd have to give you a little bit of advice on how to go around building your elevator pitch in 2025, I would very much encourage you to both consider your prepared pitch, but also to follow the lead of your interviewer. Because what happens during your job interview, the other side will introduce themselves as well, and chances are they will do it before you. So this would be an opportunity for you to get a sense of what's their preference in the job interview. For example, if they make a long introductory statement, then it probably means that you should go also on the longer side with your tell me about yourself. But most of the time, in my experience, they will keep it briefly and to the point. And my advice for you would be to do the same, except maybe if clarity of thought is a strength you have, because if clarity of thought is a strength you have, you must interview on your strength, so then you would be biased towards longer interview answers. The other piece of advice I have here with respect to tell me about yourself, and pretty much to any interview answer you'll give, is that there's obviously a huge trend today, that of AI, and AI is broadly used by people to prepare their job interviews, and as having access to thousands of elevator pitches through my website, I can confidently tell you most people will reward their answer using AI, which is a terrible idea. So I'd even intentionally stay scrappy in my tell me about yourself, just to divert a little bit from this trend, because the idea in a job interview is you differentiate yourself from other candidates. All right. The second question I'd prepare for a Google interview would be, describe a time when you had to make a difficult decision. Okay, so the reason why I'm placing this question as the second in line, only the second to your elevator pitch, would be because Google themselves on their interview advice page would advise you to focus on data while presenting the stories. Okay. Furthermore, you should also take a look at the job description and try to find out some key bits of information that might trigger eventually some stories that you might have that you could pitch during the interview. Just don't overdo it, because I used to run an applicant tracking system even before Google launched and failed their Google Hire platform. So I know that it's not that the job description will be the absolute most accurate requirements document for a job interview. There's plenty of other stuff, but still I would definitely take a look at the job description. Right now, when it comes to decision making, obviously, decision-making process would be greatly different from an accountant when compared to a developer or a PM or a software architect or an AI scientist. Okay, so the reason why I'm saying this is because you'll be surprised how many of these decision-making processes look the same as the same 1, 2, 3 step process for regardless of the role that I'm reviewing. So you must ensure that you are showcasing high standards in your decision-making process. It's a qualitative decision-making process that will sell yourself as the better candidate during the job interview. The decision-making process could also qualify, such as you dealing with ambiguous situations or cutting through ambiguity, or for people manager roles to delegate people to facilitate your decision making process. But long story short, your decision-making process is something, and your ability to use data in your decision-making process is very likely to be tested out during the job interview, even as part of a broader deep dive. Okay, so expect follow-up and challenge questions as well. All right, enough said about this one. Question number 3, why Google? Okay, so why Google is again an introductory question that still happens in many of job interviews today, and many of you would be inclined to say that this would be a Googliness test on, hey, why Google? Can you show some Googliness here? Now, in my experience, and I'm doing this for some time, I mean, Googliness would be on the lens of a cultural fit, more or less. Now, what you should understand is that there's no such thing as a company hiring for cultural fit. Okay, so the moment you're trying to fit into a cultural picture, so to speak, you're actually templating yourself and you're getting further from the best version of your true self, and therefore you're going to be less impactful. All right, so when choosing why Google, try to find something that is your true self. Okay, and to give you some example, to give you some comparisons here, maybe most of the time people would compliment the company. Why do you want to work here? Well, because you're an amazing company with amazing people, and I believe that my track record would fit into the type of job description that I'm applying for, right? So on the other extreme, if you want, on why do you want to join this company, some people would even go on the lines of, hey, you know what, I'm not even sure I want to join you as of yet. I'm here to learn more about the opportunity and whether the type of experience I have and the type of person I am could fit well, or we could have a mutually beneficial relationship, right? So notice here how bringing the most interesting answer to the table and trying to differentiate yourself from other candidates is what makes the best possible examples. Also, you should understand that on the same line, there's no such thing as hiring for cultural fit. There's no magic formula to build a perfect team either. In fact, Google tried this. They spent a ton of money on this around 8 years ago. And they weren't able to crack the code of this, So the idea is to try to be the best version of yourself instead of trying to fit into some mold, some templates, trying to show some Googliness because Google says Googliness would mean this, and that. It doesn't work this way. You should differentiate yourself you should interview on your strengths always with these things. Okay, question number 4. How would you handle conflict inside your team? All right, so conflict relates to your ability. Your ability to deal with conflict refers to your interpersonal skills. Okay, and if you've been working all your life remotely, then chances are you're going to struggle a bit more than others to answer these types of questions. But long story short, this is a behavioral interview question. Even though it's worded on the lines of how would you handle conflict inside your team, it could be translated as tell me about a time when you did handle a conflict inside your team. Best answers, at least for beginners or to mid-level skills, interviewing skills, behavioral interviewing skills, I should say, would be a STAR format. Okay, so if you fit your answer, your story of dealing with conflict into a STAR format, then chances are it's going to sound much better, and interviewers would expect you to structure your answer in the STAR format, and people prefer familiar approaches, so that's how you would structure your story. Now, when it comes to conflicts, you should understand, as broadly speaking, there's 2 types of conflicts: functional and non-functional. Okay, a functional conflict is one when you have a difference in opinion with someone over your subject matter expertise, right? You're an AI scientist, you have a difference in opinion during something on AI technicality, right? You're an accountant, you have a difference in opinion with something over how to achieve some report or how to determine some, transfer pricing operations. These things, right? A non-functional conflict would be something on the lines of, tell me about the time when someone did not like you. How did you react to this? And these questions are most appropriate for people manager types of roles. Still, they could ask you this, but even if they ask you, someone did not like you, so still divest from there to a functional conflict. They didn't like you because your idea was different than theirs on something that is subject matter expertise for your role, right? So this is how you would go finding a conflict. Okay, now if you find a conflict, that conflict will have to be with someone. That someone, so long as part of your team, it would qualify about the time when you had a conflict inside your team, right? So notice how the question, how would you handle a conflict inside your team, translates to tell me about the time when you did handle a conflict inside your team, and you would brainstorm for a functional conflict with a colleague who is part of your team, and that's how you'd give the best answer in the STAR format with quantifiable results and whatnot. But long story short, this is how you would go around finding the best conflict stories. As someone doing this for some time, I would also advise you staying away from stealing stories here or from rewarding them with AI, but that's a choice you'll have to make for yourself. Question number 5 here. Tell me about the time when you failed. All right, so tell me about the time when you failed is one of the more complex interview questions in behavioral interviews, and once you manage to get a sense of how to answer these questions efficiently, that's when you get better or significantly better. You're on the right track to do well on the behavioral part of your interviews, right? Also in their jobs advice page, they say that most of us have done more than we think, and it's easy to forget some of our wins, but also lessons from mistakes. Okay, so lessons from mistakes is the keyword is the key part you want to understand while answering failure story. Tell me about time when you failed. What's the story from which you learn the most? That applies, of course, for the job that you're applying for. Okay, we all have shortcomings. It's impossible you've never had a failure in your career. If you're just getting started with your career, then choose projects from school, but then you shouldn't go as deep as to prepare a behavioral interview if you're just a fresher, in my opinion at least. But in my experience, it will take you 3 attempts until you'll find a proper failure story, and I would even encourage you to find 2 or 3 failure stories that you could present for your job interview. Also, it's a behavioral question. I would definitely consider structuring it in a STAR format. It's just that when you consider the STAR format, situation, task, and action would be half of your answer, and the result would qualify as the learnings from the failure. And yes, I would invest up to half of the times answering that question, speaking about learnings. Okay, so it's worthwhile developing on learnings and focusing, anchoring the types of stories you have as the ones with the best learnings to answer. Tell me about the time when you failed. Okay, question number 6. How do you prioritize? Okay, in my experience, nobody's giving great answers. This interview question, whatever I ask these people in coaching sessions or people adding stories through my website. By the way, you can keep your story bank on my website for free if you choose so. And the core reason why nobody's giving great answers to this question, how do you prioritize, is at first because it's an open-ended question. And what happens is that if I ask you an open-ended question and you're not skilled with behavioral interviews or you don't understand what I'm actually looking for, you would go on the lines of, hey, my theory around prioritization would be something on the lines, and you'd find something on the spot. Most people, 99% of the people, everyone pretty much, would go with some boring strategy vision about prioritization, which won't really sell you as an efficient candidate or someone dealing well with prioritization. Rather, you could translate this question, how do you prioritize, into tell me about the time when you had to make a gut-wrenching prioritization. Okay, so if I ask you straightforward behaviorally, then it gets a bit easier for you to understand, because you would understand the expectations I have from you, a prioritization. Still, even if you find a STAR answer for this question, in my experience, it will take a few revisions for that to sound super interesting. And for example, in my training programs, I also give some more insight as to what makes a great prioritization story. It's on the same lines of handling a difficult decision-making process, or dealing with ambiguous situations, or even by showing your bias for action, if you choose so, right? Use of frameworks, prioritization frameworks, would also something sell you well here. Now, whatever you do with these things, if you choose to prepare this seriously, also focus on exhibiting high standards in your decision-making process. Remember, I said this earlier in the video, prioritization is also a decision-making process, and high standards. People who use prioritization, okay, so if, for instance, if you use a framework as a prioritization, I don't know, 2x2 matrix, the Moscow prioritization framework or whatnot, that would ultimately, sell you as a more qualified, or at least a candidate with a more qualitative approach to prioritization. And showing high standards in a job interview is super important. Okay, question number 7. If you get a job, what would be your 30, 60, 90-day plan? Okay, so this is a trending for around 6 months now. It's a trending interview question in job interviews with all companies. It's not as an important question as you might expect it to be. It's primarily asked in HR interviews, and if you've done this previously, if you've previously had to go through a 30, 60, 90-day plan into a job, then you should certainly consider using that type of experience. So to answer it behaviorally. Okay, if you're only getting started, you have no experience with these things, you should focus on learning as much as possible on the job, right? You can find all sorts of variations to structure it well with some incremental approach to get to know your team. And again, it varies for the type of role that you're going to do. If you're a customer-facing role, you would want to get to know your customers better. Okay, and these sort of things. But long story short, the moment this question might get asked and you prepare something for it, it's fine. It's no need to overthink it. Okay, question number 8. Tell me about the time when a product, service, or solution was already receiving good customer feedback, but you decided to do more. Okay, so this is a trick question. Because what happens here is that 75% of candidates, in my experience, when asked, tell me about time when a product, service, or solution was already receiving good customer feedback, would present me with a situation where a product, service was, working so-so, customer was pretty happy, but they decided to fix some bugs so the customer would be even happier. And what happens here is basically this would mean your baseline scenario for quality of that service or product was very low. Okay, yes, it has a few bugs here and there, but it works, so we couldn't care. I went a bit further and I fixed it. If you would want to exhibit high standards for the purpose of a job interview, and why wouldn't you if you're interviewing with Google, then you would have to pick an example of something that's more interesting than this. When maybe you presented a Gmail and the client was excited, everything worked fine, but decided to present them with AI features for their Gmail, which was hugely useful for them. So you looked around the corner, and delighted the customer even further with your baseline scenario already being high. So you already exhibited high standards in your processes, but you decided to do even more. Okay, so you can see how a simple question can determine a candidate's standards, whether someone with low or with high standards going into these job interviews. And it's hugely important. It can easily make or break the show. Okay, question number 9. How do you handle stress in a fast-paced environment? Okay, this question is a bit specific to Google, the way in the way it's framed, but once you'll figure out why it gets asked, it will be far easier to answer it. And the reason it gets asked is to test your interpersonal skills. Okay, so stress in a fast-paced environment. Okay, stress, working in a team, maybe there's a bit of conflict resolution involved there, so you would pick up a project with a tough deadline eventually, where you had to deliver with something, you have a difference of opinion, but you listen to the other party with the goal to establish trust. And this is how you handle stressful situation, by earning people's trust, bringing clarity to the processes and whatnot. Now, if you don't want to go the interpersonal way, there's other ways too, but this is usually the safest way you would want to go around this. Also notice, how do you handle stress in a fast-paced environment? It's also an open-ended type of question. So you should translate it. Tell me about the time when you were able to handle stress in a fast-paced environment, right? So there's the interpersonal way I said, like you handle some friction over there eventually to get something done quickly. Or you could focus on showcasing bias for action with these things as well. Again, with the prioritization maybe, with the prioritization framework, with the decision-making process that helped stress. It's your choice, but it's a question that does get asked in Google's interview, and I'll definitely take it seriously. Okay, and finally, number 10, last but not least, an easy one for you if you want. What's your favorite Google product or service, or variations of this question? And it is a pretty interesting one. It does get asked also in other companies, but Google asks it even more than in other places. So you should think about, I don't know, if you're applying for a developer, probably it would be easier to choose than if you're applying for an accounting role. Okay, so, or a manager level role. But long story short, what's your favorite Google product? And also maybe think of why this. A mistake which I think you should avoid would be to criticize them in any shape or form. Say, yeah, I love Gmail, but I hate those AI features. So stay away from these things. But you should certainly prepare something on these lines, right? So as a closing remark here, my objective would be to help you to significantly improve your behavioral interviewing skills. So don't think as just passing your job interview at Google, but rather nailing that behavioral interview questions, performing well during the interview, so you can also optimize your chances to find the best possible team to join there. So I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.